The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mika Velasco reached for a carton of milk, her weathered hand steady despite the tremor that hadn't left since Kandahar. Aisle 7 of the Safeway in Norfolk had become her sanctuary. Mundane, predictable, the kind of place where ghosts couldn't follow. She wore civilian clothes now, faded jeans, a Virginia Tech sweatshirt that had seen better days, sneakers with holes she refused to replace. Just another face in the crowd, another story tucked away behind tired eyes. The shopping cart's wheel squeaked as she navigated past the cereal boxes, each step measured and deliberate. 3 years of civilian life had taught her to blend in, to swallow the muscle memory that still made her scan exit routes and watch the mirrors positioned at aisle corners. The retirement papers had been signed, the medal ceremonies attended, the handshakes exchanged. Commander Mika "Ghost" Velasco, formerly of Strike Fighter Squadron 103, was officially history. But history has a way of finding people who try to outrun it. The two men appeared at the end of the produce section like shadows given form. Naval Special Warfare insignia caught the light on their dress blues, their posture carrying that unmistakable weight of purpose that made civilians step aside without understanding why. They weren't browsing vegetables. They were hunting. Mika's hand froze on a bag of apples. The shorter SEAL moved first, his eyes finding hers across 30 feet of grocery store real estate. She recognized the look, the same one she'd worn when briefing pilots before missions that didn't officially exist. His partner flanked left, creating a tactical approach pattern that made her pulse quicken. "Ma'am," the first SEAL said, his voice low enough to avoid civilian ears but clear enough to cut through the ambient noise of shopping carts and checkout scanners. "We need to talk." Mika set the apples down carefully, her mind already racing through possibilities. Witness protection compromise, security breach, family emergency. The usual suspects when your past involved things that never made it into mission reports. "I think you have the wrong person," she replied, keeping her voice steady while her peripheral vision tracked the second SEAL's position. "I'm just doing my shopping." The first SEAL stepped closer, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something approaching respect. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made the grocery store fade away, replacing fluorescent lights with the memory of cockpit glass and endless sky. "Ghost," he whispered. The callsign hit her like a punch to the chest. Nobody had used that name in 3 years. Nobody was supposed to know it existed. The milk carton slipped from her fingers, hitting the linoleum floor with a wet thud that seemed to echo through dimensions of time and space, carrying her back to places where that name meant the difference between coming home and becoming another star on a classified wall. Mika's world shifted. The retirement was over. Whatever came next would demand everything she'd thought she'd left behind in the cockpit of an FA-18 Super Hornet, somewhere above the mountains of Afghanistan where legends were born and ghosts learned to fly. The SEALs waited, patient as predators, while civilian life crumbled around her feet like the spilled milk spreading across polished floor tiles. The hunt had begun again. 20 minutes later, Mika sat in the back of an unmarked government sedan racing toward Norfolk Naval Base, her grocery list forgotten on the passenger seat like a relic from another life. The SEALs had been efficient with their extraction, polite enough to avoid civilian attention, firm enough to make refusal impossible. They'd said nothing during the drive, leaving her alone with memories that tasted like jet fuel and regret. The base materialized through morning mist, its familiar silhouette triggering responses her body hadn't forgotten. Guard towers stood like sentinels against the gray Virginia sky, their searchlights sweeping endless arcs across controlled airspace. The sedan passed through 3 checkpoints, each requiring credentials she no longer possessed, yet somehow the barriers lifted anyway. "Your clearance was reactivated an hour ago," the driver mentioned without looking back. "Admiral's orders." Admiral, the word carried implications that made her stomach tighten. Admirals didn't personally reactivate retired commanders unless the situation had moved beyond normal channels, beyond normal solutions, into the realm where exceptional people became necessary tools. The car stopped outside Hangar 7, its bulk casting shadows that seemed to reach across 3 years of carefully constructed civilian normalcy. Through reinforced windows, she could make out the familiar shapes of aircraft covered in protective tarps, their forms suggesting the lethal elegance of machines designed for controlled violence. Commander Elena Vasquez waited beside the hangar doors, her uniform crisp against the industrial backdrop. They'd flown together once, a joint exercise over the Pacific that had ended with Vasquez remarking that watching Ghost fly was like watching physics bend to accommodate pure instinct. Now Vasquez looked older, carrying the weight of responsibilities that ground-based officers accumulated like scar tissue. "Mika," she said, using the civilian name deliberately, "thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" Mika replied, stepping out of the sedan and feeling the salt air fill her lungs with memories of carrier deployments and midnight launches. "You always have choices," Vasquez said, "but some situations require specific skill sets, your skill set." They walked toward the hangar in measured steps, their footsteps echoing off concrete that had absorbed decades of military purpose. Vasquez's expression suggested briefing rooms and classified files, the kind of information that changed how people slept at night. "How bad is it?" Mika asked. Vasquez paused at the hangar doors, her hand resting on the access panel. "Bad enough that we need a ghost." The doors opened with hydraulic sighs, revealing an interior that smelled of aviation fuel and possibility. Inside, beneath banks of industrial lighting, sat an aircraft that made Mika's breath catch in her throat. Not a Super Hornet, something newer, sharper, carrying lines that suggested technologies she'd only heard whispered about in classified briefings. The machine waited like a caged predator, its surfaces reflecting light in ways that seemed to bend around its edges. Stealth technology had evolved since her retirement, apparently into forms that challenged basic assumptions about visibility and presence. "Meet the FA-28 Wraith," Vasquez said. "Your new ride." Mika circled the aircraft slowly, her trained eye cataloging details that would have been impossible 3 years ago. The cockpit glass curved in mathematical perfection, the engine intakes positioned to minimize radar cross-section while maximizing performance. Everything about the machine suggested capability held in careful restraint, waiting for the right pilot to unleash its potential. "I've been retired for 3 years," she said. "My certifications are expired." "Your certifications were refreshed yesterday," Vasquez replied. "Along with your security clearance, your medical records, and your operational status. On paper, you never left." The hangar felt suddenly smaller, its walls closing in with the weight of implications. Mika had built a new life carefully, deliberately, choosing normalcy over the adrenaline that had once defined her existence. Now that life seemed fragile as tissue paper, ready to tear at the first strong wind. "What's the mission?" she asked. Vasquez gestured toward a briefing room visible through reinforced glass windows. Inside, wall-mounted displays showed satellite imagery and tactical overlays that suggested operations extending beyond normal geographical boundaries. "Something that requires a ghost to handle," Vasquez said. "Something that requires the best pilot we've ever had." The compliment felt heavy with unspoken urgency. The briefing room smelled of fresh coffee and tension, its walls lined with monitors displaying real-time intelligence feeds from locations Mika couldn't immediately identify. 6 officers sat around a polished conference table, their collective attention focused on classified folders thick with operational details. The room's acoustics suggested soundproofing, designed to contain conversations that could reshape international relations. Admiral Rebecca Hayes stood at the head of the table, her silver hair reflecting the harsh LED lighting, while her eyes carried the kind of intelligence that had navigated 30 years of naval politics without compromise. She'd been a captain when Mika was still learning to land on carrier decks, establishing a reputation for operational brilliance that had elevated her beyond the reach of bureaucratic interference. "Commander Velasco," Hayes said, the rank sliding back into place like a key in a well-oiled lock. "Thank you for accepting this assignment." "I haven't accepted anything yet," Mika replied, taking the offered seat at the table's far end. The leather chair felt foreign after years of kitchen tables and coffee shop booths. Hayes smiled, an expression that suggested she'd expected exactly that response. "Fair enough. Let me show you what we're dealing with." The wall displays flickered to life, revealing satellite imagery of mountainous terrain that looked vaguely Middle Eastern, but carried geographic markers Mika didn't recognize. The timestamps showed the images were less than 6 hours old, their clarity suggesting orbital assets normally reserved for operations that officially didn't exist. 72 hours ago, Hayes continued, we lost contact with a classified reconnaissance asset operating in this region. A red dot appeared on the map, pulsing against terrain that seemed to swallow light. The asset was carrying intelligence critical to ongoing diplomatic negotiations. Mika studied the topography with practiced eyes, noting the elevation changes and weather patterns visible in the infrared overlays. The area looked hostile, not just in terms of geography, but in the way it seemed designed to defeat conventional rescue operations. "What kind of asset?" she asked. "The kind that walks and talks," Hayes replied. "The kind that knows things that could destabilize 3 allied governments if it falls into the wrong hands." The room fell silent except for the whisper of climate control systems and the distant hum of base operations. Mika felt the familiar weight settling onto her shoulders, the responsibility that came with capabilities other people couldn't match. "You want me to go get them," she said. "I want you to bring our people home," Hayes confirmed. "Whatever it takes." The mission parameters crystallized in her mind, like frost on cockpit glass. They called the briefing room the vault for good reason. No signals entered or left without authorization. No conversations escaped without official transcription. No decisions were made without understanding their weight in blood and political consequences. Mika had been in similar rooms before, but never as the primary asset for an operation that felt increasingly like a one-way ticket. Admiral Hayes activated a holographic display that transformed the conference table into a three-dimensional battlefield. Mountains rose from the surface like digital monuments, their peaks crowned with enemy installations marked in hostile red. The missing asset's last known position pulsed amber in a valley that seemed designed by geography and circumstance to be the perfect trap. "Agent designation, Raven," Hayes said. "Real name classified. Deep cover operative with intimate knowledge of nuclear proliferation networks across 3 continents. Captured during what should have been a routine intelligence handoff." The hologram shifted, showing intercepted communications traffic and heat signatures that suggested significant enemy presence in the target area. Guard posts, vehicle patrols, surface-to-air missile installations, everything necessary to turn a rescue mission into a suicide run for conventional forces. "Why me?" Mika asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "You've got entire special operations units designed for hostage recovery." "Because this isn't just about getting in and out," Commander Vasquez interjected from her position beside the tactical displays. "The enemy knows we're coming. They've had 3 days to prepare, to position assets, to turn that entire valley into a kill zone. Conventional insertion would be detected before our forces reached the outer perimeter." Hayes nodded, her expression grave with the weight of previous failures. "We've lost 2 reconnaissance drones in the last 48 hours, electronic warfare assets that should have been invisible to anything they're running. Whatever they have in that valley, it's more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested. Mika leaned forward, studying the topographical data with the intensity she'd once reserved for pre-flight planning. The terrain offered limited approach vectors, most of which led through choke points perfectly positioned for ambush. Mountains channeled movement into predictable patterns, while the valley floor provided nowhere to hide from elevated observation posts. "So you need someone who can get in without being seen," she said. "We need someone who can become invisible," Hayes confirmed. "Someone who can make an aircraft disappear from every sensor they have, extract our asset, and return without leaving evidence we were ever there." The room's atmosphere shifted, electronic displays casting blue light across faces etched with the gravity of impossible missions. Mika recognized the feeling from Afghanistan, that moment when conventional options dissolved, leaving only the space between success and catastrophe for exceptional people to occupy. "The FA-28 has capabilities your old Hornet couldn't touch," Vasquez added. "Adaptive camouflage systems, electronic warfare suites, sensor packages that can map enemy positions through solid rock. But technology alone won't be enough. This mission requires pilot intuition at a level we can't train or simulate." Mika's eyes found the classified folder placed discreetly beside her chair. Inside would be operational details, rules of engagement, extraction protocols, everything necessary to transform theoretical possibility into tactical reality. Her hand hovered over the cover, understanding that opening it would mean crossing a threshold back into the world she tried to leave behind. The weight of choice, balanced on the edge of duty and self-preservation. The classified folder opened with the whisper of pages that had absorbed too many secrets. Inside, satellite reconnaissance photos revealed details that made the tactical situation clear. Agent Raven was being held in a facility designed to be impregnable, surrounded by enough firepower to hold off a conventional assault indefinitely. But Mika's attention fixed on a different detail: the mission timeline. 36 hours, she read aloud. Why the deadline? Admiral Hayes exchanged glances with the intelligence officers lining the conference room's perimeter. The kind of look that preceded revelations that changed the scope of everything. "Because in 36 hours, Raven's intelligence expires," Hayes said. "The nuclear material procurement network they've been tracking for 18 months will complete a transaction that puts weapons-grade uranium in the hands of people who shouldn't have access to grocery stores, let alone fissile material." The holographic display shifted, showing shipping routes and financial networks that span continents. Red lines connected nodes of activity across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, a web of transactions and movements that suggested coordination at levels that made governments nervous. Raven was supposed to deliver the final piece of evidence, Vasquez continued. Proof of state sponsorship that would allow international intervention. Without that intelligence, the uranium shipment disappears into the black market, and 6 months from now we'll be dealing with dirty bombs in major cities. Mika studied the tactical overlay with growing understanding. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a prevention operation disguised as human recovery. The kind of assignment that looked straightforward in briefing rooms but revealed layers of complexity once aircraft left the ground. "What's the cover story?" she asked. "Training flight," Hayes replied. "Routine proficiency check for the FA-28 platform. Flight plan filed for oceanic testing over international waters. If anything goes wrong, officially you were never in that airspace." The deniability clause felt familiar, a comfort blanket made of legal fiction that protected larger operations from smaller failures. Mika had flown under similar cover before, missions that existed only in the memories of people who couldn't discuss them afterward. "And if I don't come back?" "Then officially, you never left," Hayes said without hesitation. "Your retirement remains intact, your family receives your pension, and history remembers you as a decorated veteran who died in a training accident." The sterile honesty was almost refreshing. No appeals to patriotism or duty, no emotional manipulation, just the cold mathematics of national security decisions measured against individual human lives. Mika closed the folder, her decision crystallizing with the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. Around the table, officers waited with the patience of people accustomed to moments when single individuals determined the fate of thousands. "When do I brief the mission?" she asked. Hayes smiled, the expression carrying 3 decades of difficult decisions. "Right now." The tactical briefing began with weather data that painted the target region in shades of lethal unpredictability. Mountain winds capable of tearing aircraft apart, thermal layers that confused infrared sensors, precipitation patterns that turned visibility into a negotiation between pilot skill and atmospheric cooperation. The meteorological reports read like warnings written by geography itself. "Launch window opens at 300 local," the intelligence officer explained, his laser pointer dancing across digital terrain models that revealed the target area's defensive positions. "Weather front moves in 6 hours later, providing natural concealment but making extraction significantly more dangerous." Mika absorbed the data with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 87 combat missions. Every detail mattered: wind direction, cloud cover, the position of enemy patrols relative to the phases of a moon that would either hide her approach or illuminate her retreat. "What about electronic countermeasures?" she asked, noting the concentration of radar installations surrounding the target facility. "They're running a layered defense," Vasquez replied, activating displays that showed overlapping sensor coverage in 3-dimensional detail. Surface-based radar, mobile units, and at least 2 airborne early warning platforms. Anything conventional would be detected before it crossed the outer perimeter. The defensive grid looked formidable, designed by people who understood modern warfare's electronic dimensions. But Mika had learned to read such displays the way other people read traffic patterns, not as obstacles, but as puzzles requiring creative solutions. "The FA-28's adaptive systems can counter most of what they're running," Hayes added. "But success depends on flying below their engagement threshold while maintaining enough altitude for rapid extraction. The margin for error is measured in feet, not miles." Mika nodded, her mind already calculating approach angles and escape vectors. The mission profile demanded precision, flying at levels that transformed aircraft operation into high-speed choreography between machine capabilities and pilot instinct. "What about backup?" she asked. "You are the backup," Hayes said quietly. 2 previous extraction attempts failed. Special Forces insertion was compromised before they reached the facility perimeter. Combat search and rescue couldn't maintain position long enough for effective recovery operations. The room fell silent as implications settled like weights onto the conference table. Previous failures meant enemy forces had learned from each attempt, adapting their defensive positions to counter conventional tactics. Whatever approach had worked before would be anticipated now. "So they're expecting us," Mika said. "They're expecting conventional approaches," Vasquez corrected. "They're not expecting a ghost." The Callsign carried its own mythology, stories whispered in ready rooms about the pilot who could make aircraft vanish from radar screens through combinations of technical skill and tactical intuition that defied standard doctrine. Those stories had grown in the telling, until they resembled legend more than operational history. But legends became necessary when reality ran out of conventional options. "Brief me on the aircraft systems," Mika said, settling into the familiar rhythm of pre-mission preparation. "I need to know what she can do." The hangar's atmosphere changed when they powered up the FA-28 for the first time. Generators hummed to life with increasing intensity, feeding electricity into systems that transformed the static aircraft into something alive with technological purpose. Mika stood beside the machine, while technicians ran through pre-flight checks, her hands tracing surfaces that felt warm despite the morning chill. Adaptive stealth skin, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez explained, his voice carrying the pride of someone who'd helped birth cutting-edge technology. Electromagnetic sensors read incoming radar signatures and automatically adjust surface configuration to minimize return signals. It's not just stealth, it's active camouflage. Mika watched displays showing the aircraft's radar cross-section shifting in real time, its signature fluctuating between visible contact and electronic ghost. The technology represented years of development beyond anything she'd flown before, evolution distilled into aerodynamic form. "What about performance characteristics?" she asked. "Supercruise capability without afterburner," Rodriguez continued, consulting technical specifications that read like science fiction made manifest. "Maximum speed classified, but let's say it makes the Hornet look like it's standing still. G-force tolerance enhanced through pilot support systems that practically eliminate blackout threshold." The cockpit revealed itself as they climbed into the aircraft's forward section. Every surface carried information displays and control interfaces that suggested capabilities extending far beyond traditional fighter aircraft roles. Navigation systems showed global positioning accurate to centimeters, while weapons systems offered options she'd never seen before. Electronic warfare suite can spoof enemy radar, communications, and targeting systems simultaneously. The technical briefing continued. "Think of it as making the enemy see what you want them to see instead of what's actually there." Mika settled into the pilot's seat, her body remembering the feeling of being connected to several $1 million of military hardware through haptic feedback systems and neural interface protocols. The aircraft seemed to respond to her presence, displays adjusting brightness and configuration to accommodate her visual preferences without conscious input. "Flight controls are neural-linked," Rodriguez explained. "The aircraft responds to intention as much as manual input. Takes some adjustment, but pilots who adapt report feeling like they're wearing the aircraft instead of flying it." She ran through startup procedures, watching systems come online with the smooth progression of technology that had moved beyond mechanical limitations into purely electronic realms. Engine diagnostics showed parameters that suggested thrust-to-weight ratios approaching theoretical maximums. "How long do I have to get familiar with the systems?" she asked. 4 hours of simulator time," Vasquez replied from the hangar floor. "Then launch." 4 hours to master technology that represented years of development and testing. The timeline felt impossible, but impossibility had become routine somewhere around her 50th combat mission. "Then we'd better get started," Mika said. The flight simulator occupied an entire building adjacent to the main hangar, its interior filled with motion platforms and visual systems designed to replicate every aspect of FA-28 operations. Mika strapped herself into the cockpit replica, her hands finding controls that felt familiar despite their advanced configuration. Muscle memory remained reliable even after 3 years of civilian life. Beginning basic flight envelope exploration, the simulation operator announced through headset communications that crackled with the clarity of military-grade electronics. Starting with standard atmospheric conditions, progressing to combat scenarios. The virtual cockpit came alive around her, displays showing artificial skis and digital terrain that looked more real than reality. The FA-28's responses felt different from anything she'd flown before, more immediate, more intuitive, as if the aircraft anticipated her intentions before she'd fully formed them. "Neural interface calibration complete," a technician reported. "Pilot adaptation index within normal parameters." Mika pushed the aircraft through basic maneuvers, feeling the way it moved through simulated air with grace that bordered on supernatural. Roll rates that should have induced G-force blackouts felt manageable, turn radiuses that should have torn wings off seemed effortless. The machine's capabilities extended beyond conventional performance boundaries into realms where physics bent to accommodate superior engineering. "Take her supersonic," the operator instructed. "Let's see how she handles." The throttle response felt like touching lightning, carefully contained within technological boundaries. Acceleration pressed her into the seat with force that built gradually, then suddenly, then overwhelmingly, until the aircraft broke sound barriers with barely perceptible transition. Speed became a liquid thing, flowing around the airframe in patterns that defied her previous understanding of atmospheric flight. "Mach 2.3 and climbing," she reported, watching the digital altimeter numbers blur upward. "Handling characteristics remain stable." "Now try the stealth systems," Vasquez's voice crackled through the communication link. "Activate adaptive camouflage and see what happens to your radar signature." Mika engaged systems she'd never used before, watching her aircraft's electronic signature diminish on targeting displays until she'd become essentially invisible to simulated enemy sensors. The effect felt surreal, like watching herself disappear without actually moving. "Ghost mode engaged," she reported, understanding suddenly why they'd chosen that particular callsign for this mission. "I'm not showing up on anything." The simulation progressed through increasingly complex scenarios: night flying, adverse weather, electronic jamming, surface-to-air missile threats. Each challenge revealed new aspects of the aircraft's capabilities, while testing her ability to integrate advanced technology with tactical instincts developed over years of combat flying. "Final scenario," the operator announced. "Low-altitude penetration of defended airspace with time-critical extraction under fire." The simulation threw everything at her simultaneously: enemy radar, missile locks, terrain masking requirements, navigation challenges that demanded split-second decisions while maintaining stealth characteristics. Mika found herself flying by instinct, trusting the aircraft's systems while pushing her own skills to match their potential. She completed the extraction with 12 seconds to spare. "Simulation complete," the operator announced. "Performance rating exceptional." Mika sat in the silent cockpit, her heart rate slowly returning to normal as adrenaline faded into the satisfaction of systems mastered and challenges overcome. The aircraft felt like an extension of her nervous system now, responsive to thoughts as much as controls. "How do you feel?" Vasquez asked through the intercom. "Like I never stopped flying," Mika replied. 3 years of civilian life had vanished like morning mist, replaced by the clarity that came from remembering who she'd been before grocery stores and retirement papers. The person who'd earned the Callsign ghost was still there, waiting beneath layers of deliberate normalcy for the moment when exceptional circumstances demanded exceptional people. "Then let's go bring our agent home," Hayes said. The pre-flight ritual felt like meditation performed at the intersection of technology and human capability. Mika moved through cockpit checks with methodical precision, her hands confirming what electronic systems had already verified. The FA-28 was ready to transform theoretical possibility into operational reality. Every switch position, every display reading, every system status confirmed the aircraft's readiness to carry her into situations where small margins determined large outcomes. "Control surfaces responding nominally," she reported into her headset microphone, watching flight control computers process her inputs with response times measured in milliseconds. "Engine parameters within acceptable ranges across all operational modes." The hangar around her bustled with technicians performing final preparations: ordnance loading, fuel calculations, communication system verification. Each person moved with the focused intensity of professionals who understood their work, would determine whether someone came home or became another classified casualty statistic. Weather update, the meteorological officer reported through ground communications. Target area shows increasing cloud cover, winds shifting to favorable conditions for approach and extraction. Window remains optimal for the next 4 hours. Mika acknowledged the report while running through mental calculations that balanced atmospheric conditions against enemy defensive capabilities. Weather could be an ally or obstacle depending on how skillfully it was employed. Cloud cover that concealed approach might also complicate navigation, while clear skies that aided precision could expose aircraft to visual detection. Ghost, this is tower control, the radio crackled with official authority. You are cleared for immediate departure. Flight path filed as training exercise Bravo 77. Good hunting. The hangar doors opened with mechanical precision, revealing pre-dawn darkness that stretched toward horizons still hours from sunrise. Beyond the airfield's illuminated perimeter, the world waited in shades of gray and possibility, while stars provided navigation points for missions that officially didn't exist. Mika advanced the throttles carefully, feeling the aircraft respond with smooth progression from static machine to dynamic weapon system. The FA-28 moved forward with barely audible whispers from engines designed to mask their own operational signatures. Ghost departing Norfolk Naval Base, she transmitted, proceeding to assigned training area. The official fiction felt necessary, providing cover for operations that required plausible deniability. As far as recorded history would know, Commander Velasco had taken a new aircraft for routine proficiency training over international waters. Whatever happened in the mountains of an unnamed country would remain classified beyond the reach of historical scrutiny. The aircraft lifted into pre-dawn skies with grace that defied its technological complexity. Below, Virginia's coastline fell away into patterns of lights that marked civilian communities continuing their daily routines, unaware that their security sometimes depended on people who flew missions that never officially happened. Ghost airborne, she reported, proceeding on course. The real mission had begun. Dawn broke over the Atlantic as Mika pushed the FA-28 toward its operational ceiling, climbing through atmospheric layers toward the edge of space where air became too thin for conventional aircraft. Below, ocean swells caught early light in patterns that stretched toward horizons marked only by the curvature of Earth itself. The view from 40,000 feet reminded her why she'd become a pilot. For moments when human capability intersected with perspectives normally reserved for satellites and gods. Ghost, you are approaching international boundary, air traffic control reported through encrypted communications, transferring to command authority designated overlord. The radio frequency shifted, connecting her to controllers who operated from locations she didn't need to know about, managing aircraft movements across operational areas that didn't appear on civilian charts. Military aviation existed in parallel dimensions alongside commercial air traffic, invisible except to people with appropriate clearances. Ghost, Overlord Control, the new voice crackled through atmospheric interference. You are cleared to proceed on classified routing. Maintain radio silence until checkpoint Whiskey. Mika acknowledged the transmission while engaging systems that would make her aircraft invisible to civilian radar installations. The FA-28's electronic warfare suite activated automatically, spoofing identification transponders and radar signatures to present false information to curious observers below. The flight path took her north of established shipping lanes, over waters where military exercises occasionally disturbed commercial fishing operations. Her navigation displays showed course corrections that would take her around population centers and through corridors where supersonic flight wouldn't attract unwanted attention. Hours passed in the meditative rhythm of high-altitude flight. The aircraft's autopilot systems handled routine navigation, while Mika reviewed mission parameters and studied target area photography until every detail was memorized. Agent Raven's location, enemy defensive positions, extraction routes, everything necessary for split-second decisions when electronic warfare replaced careful planning. Ghost Checkpoint Whiskey, she finally transmitted, proceeding to operational area. Copy Ghost. Be advised, latest intelligence indicates enemy defensive posture has increased. They're expecting company. The warning felt ominous against the clean clarity of stratospheric flight. Below, cloud formations built into weather systems that would either aid or complicate the mission, depending on how skillfully they were exploited. Mika began descent procedures, trading altitude for the tactical advantages that came from flying closer to terrain that could mask electronic signatures. The FA-28 dropped through cloud layers like a stone wrapped in silk, its passage marked only by vapor trails that dissipated in seconds. As altitude decreased, the outside world became real again. Mountains, valleys, settlements where people lived lives unaware that their peace sometimes required violence performed by specialists. Overlord Ghost approaching initial checkpoint, she transmitted, beginning final approach phase. Ghost Overlord, you are cleared hot. Weapons-free mission parameters active. Bring them home. The simple phrase carried the weight of authorization for whatever force became necessary to complete mission objectives. The mountains appeared through broken cloud cover like teeth emerging from morning mist, their peaks crowned with snow that caught early light in patterns beautiful enough to distract from the military installations barely visible in the valleys below. Mika dropped the FA-28 to contour following altitude, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection, while maintaining enough speed for rapid escape if circumstances required violent departure. Ghost entering hostile airspace, she transmitted on encrypted frequencies that bounced communications off satellites positioned specifically for operations that needed global reach. Stealth systems engaged, proceeding to target area. The aircraft's adaptive camouflage activated automatically, its surface configuration shifting to match radar signatures that suggested much smaller, slower aircraft. Electronic systems fed false information to enemy sensors, while advanced navigation maintained precise positioning despite the electronic interference designed to confuse unwanted visitors. Through the cockpit glass, Mika could see guard towers positioned on elevated terrain that commanded observation over multiple approach routes. Vehicles moved in patterns that suggested regular patrols, their thermal signatures visible on infrared displays that tracked heat sources through solid obstacles. The defensive preparation was thorough, professional, designed by people who took security seriously. Target facility identified, she reported, studying compound layouts that matched intelligence photographs with concerning accuracy. Multiple structures, heavy security presence, vehicle activity consistent with briefing materials. The FA-28 sensors painted detailed pictures of enemy positions without emitting detectable signals. Passive systems gathered information through techniques that left no electronic footprint, building tactical awareness without alerting targets to surveillance activities. Overlord Ghost, request permission to commence extraction operations. Ghost Overlord, you are authorized to proceed. Execute at your discretion. The moment of transition arrived like stepping across a threshold between planning and implementation. Everything that followed would depend on split-second decisions made, while flying aircraft through defensive systems designed to prevent exactly what she was attempting. Mika banked the aircraft into attack position, feeling the FA-28 respond to her intentions with mechanical precision that bordered on telepathic. The neural interface systems translated thought into motion, reducing the delay between decision and execution to levels that made conventional pilot training seem primitive by comparison. Going dark, she transmitted, switching to radio silence protocols that would maintain communication blackout until mission completion or emergency evacuation became necessary. Below, the target facility waited like a puzzle box designed to be opened only by people with specific keys. Those keys included advanced technology, exceptional pilot skill, and the kind of tactical intuition that transformed impossible missions into accomplished facts. The extraction phase began with Mika repositioning the FA-28 to provide optimal overwatch of the target facility, while maintaining stealth characteristics that kept her invisible to defensive systems. The aircraft's sensors mapped enemy positions in real time, building tactical pictures that updated faster than human consciousness could process the information directly. Through advanced optics, she could see the compound's central building where intelligence suggested Agent Raven was being held. The structure looked designed for containment rather than comfort: reinforced walls, minimal windows, entrance configurations that suggested people entered but might not leave without authorization. Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures in target building, she whispered into her voice recorder, maintaining operational log despite radio silence protocols. Estimated 12 to 15 personnel, consistent with security detail expectations. The FA-28's electronic warfare systems detected communication traffic between guard posts, intercepting and analyzing conversations that revealed routine security protocols and shift change schedules. Enemy forces operated with professional discipline, but their radio communications suggested they weren't expecting immediate threats. Guard rotation in progress, Mika noted, watching personnel movements through aircraft sensors that could track individual humans through building walls. Window opening for approach phase. She maneuvered the aircraft closer to the facility, using terrain features and adaptive stealth to maintain concealment while reducing distance to target area. The FA-28's flight controls felt increasingly responsive as she pushed the systems toward operational limits that conventional aircraft couldn't approach. Beginning final approach, she recorded. Stealth systems nominal, enemy defensive posture unchanged. The compound grew larger in her displays until individual structures became tactically relevant features rather than intelligence photographs. Guard towers, vehicle positions, personnel movements, everything resolved into immediate tactical reality, requiring split-second decisions based on information gathered from aircraft systems that transformed warfare into precise, technological art. Target building identified, Agent Ravens.